And the chat and all of the questions will be posted, as well as the video, on getinvolved.london.ca after this meeting. So that will all be available to everyone. So please be respectful in your comments. And yes, we will get going. And I do want to acknowledge, I just saw that Councillor Kaya Baga has signed on as well. So I'm happy to see her involved, and we do have a fairly good crowd right now. So with that, Isaac, take it away.
Thank you, Britt, for your introduction, and welcome everybody to the Victoria Park Secondary Plan, especially the virtual community information meeting. My name is Isaac de Keuster. I'm a city planner for the City of London, and I've been working on this project. So what is the purpose of tonight's meeting? We will provide an overview of the process to date. We will present the Victoria Park Secondary Plan as it went to Council in February 2020. And we will gather comments and feedback on the secondary plan to help inform the development of the revised secondary plan for consideration by Municipal Council in the first quarter of 2021. The revised plan, as received by the Municipal Council in February 2020 for public input, resulted in a number of comments that we received. These include strengthening sustainable development, consider affordable housing section, sound mitigation from noise generated from festivals, consider active transportation section, how the trees and green space will be impacted by development, the existing uses, character, and context of surrounding areas, and finally, some other issues that were raised by the public, such as modeling of permitted heights and related shadow impacts. Part of this secondary plan for the Victoria Park area has been extensive community engagement. Over 200 parties expressed their interest. We've had a number of community information meetings, both in person and this one as a virtual platform. Further, we have developed a Get Involved website. City planning was present at a number of summer festivals, and we have had numerous stakeholder meetings and a virtual reality drop-in session as well. The process for this secondary plan has had a lengthy history. I won't walk through all the dates, but I want to highlight that in May 2019, the Municipal Council endorsed the draft principles. And in June 2019, the draft principles were received by Municipal Council for public input based on feedback and the community information meetings. Then in February 2020, the revised plan was received by Municipal Council for public input. Of course, today we are participating in the virtual community information meeting. And finally, in the first quarter of 2021, the revised plan will be brought forward to the Planning and Environment Committee for consideration. Here is an overview of the study area. Of course, Victoria Park is bounded by Wellington Street, Central Ave, Clarence Street, and Dufferin Avenue. If you take a little bit of a closer look at the study area, you see that there are a number of opportunities for intensification, mainly the surface parking lots located around the park. And the study area includes all properties that are fronting directly onto the Victoria Park. And these are all included within the study area boundaries outlined in red. If we dive a little bit deeper into the existing context, the North Policy area directly adjacent to Victoria Park is lined by 2.5 house-front buildings, many of which have been converted into office or multi-unit residential uses. This is with the exception of the frontage on Richmond Street, which is a 4-story mixed-use building that is part of Richmond Row. In the western portion of the North Policy area is also a 3-story residential building, and the parking lot in the center of the block provides an opportunity for intensification. The North Policy Area is not in the Heritage Conservation District, but many properties in the area are listed on the city's register for cultural heritage resources. And finally, the western portion of the North Policy Area is in the urban corridor place type, and the eastern portion is in the neighborhood place type of the London Plan. Then, as we move to the East Policy Area, a variety of uses can be found here, such as City Hall, Centennial Hall, Reginald Cooper Square, a surface parking lot, and other uses include professional offices and a residential, multi-unit residential building and a single detached dwelling. The entirety of the East Policy Area is in the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District. The southern portion of the East Policy Area is part of the downtown place type, and the northern portion is part of the neighborhood place type. Then going further to the South Policy Area, which is dominated by the unique London Life Insurance building and a large surface parking lot on the western portion of the South Policy Area. And the entirety of the South Policy Area is both in the downtown place type as well as the Downtown Heritage Conservation District. And finally, the West Policy Area is a triangular area bounded by Richmond Street, Clarence Street, and Dufferin Avenue. A number of different uses can be found here, such as religious institutions, St. Peter's Cathedral Basilica, and the First Baptist Church, commercial uses, and a surface parking lot. The entirety of the policy area is in the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District, with the exception of the most northern lot. The southern portion is also part of the downtown place type, and the rest of the policy area is part of the rapid transit corridor place type. And the parking lot also provides a clear opportunity for further intensification. Here you see the Victoria Park secondary plan boundaries outlined once again in red. And the secondary plan area has been divided into 4 different policy areas, each encompassing a different side of Victoria Park: north, east, south, and west. Then we go to the existing policy framework. The existing policy framework around Victoria Park is extremely varied, quite complex, and also overlapping. As I said before, two different heritage conservation districts apply to the area: West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District and the Downtown Conservation District. Other special policy areas apply as well as the 1989 official plan and the London Plan, and numerous zoning bylaws. On the left, you see the land use designation from the 1989 official plan. In purple, you see the downtown zoning, which has the highest density. Then in green, community facilities. In pink, around Richmond Street, the Main Street commercial corridor. In orange, with the black dots, the multifamily medium density residential zoning. In yellow, you see the low density residential neighborhood. And then finally, purple with white stripes is office designation. Victoria Park itself in the middle is designated as an open space. The London Plan from 2016 has 3 different place types that apply to the Victoria Park secondary plan area. The most southern part in red is the downtown place types and allow for heights up to 35 stories. Then in blue, along Richmond Corridor, the rapid transit corridor, which allows up to 16 stories. And then further in yellow, the neighborhood place type, which allows for a maximum height of 4 to 6 stories. As I said before, a number of different zoning bylaws apply to the area. You can see that the current existing height framework allows for 3 to 5 stories on most sides of the park. On the southern portion, located in the downtown, the maximum permitted heights are up to 30 stories. For the City Hall precinct, this is 22 stories. And finally, for 556 Wellington Street, a maximum of 30 stories is allowed, but additional setback requirements apply here as well. These setback requirements say that a 1.2 meter setback for each story above 50 meters is required. And based on the size of the Great West London property, this means that a maximum of roughly 18 stories can be achieved with the setback factored in. Here, another overview of the existing zoning heights. Generally, the building heights around Victoria Park will transition from higher buildings in the downtown and along Richmond Street to lower buildings near low-rise residential areas. Buildings will be designed to provide appropriate transition to the adjacent low-rise residential area. And here you see the same height limits based on current zoning, but then expressed in 3D massing, with once again a transition from higher buildings near the downtown core and fronting Richmond Street to lower buildings near low-rise residential areas. Based on the secondary plan principles, based on the secondary plan principles that were endorsed by Council, the draft secondary plan sets out a number of secondary plan principles: preserve and strengthen visual connections to Victoria Park and create new view corridors where possible, improve and create new connections to Victoria Park, preserve the landscaped edge around Victoria Park, enhance and conserve cultural heritage resources within and surrounding Victoria Park, frame Victoria Park with an appropriately skilled base that creates a comfortable pedestrian environment, identify opportunities for compatible and sensitive intensification, protect the residential amenity of the Woodfield neighborhood by mitigating impacts of new development, support and animate Victoria Park with active uses on the ground floor, design buildings to celebrate the prominence of Victoria Park as a citywide gem, continue to enhance the amenity of Victoria Park as a neighborhood green space, as well as a destination for all Londoners to attend festivals and events, and finally, respond to climate change by encouraging sustainable development, building design, and active transportation options. The secondary plan principles form the basis for the policies that have been developed, and those provide guidance on a number of issues such as view corridors, connections, the public realm, cultural heritage, build form, land use, and compatibility with park activities. The preservation of existing view corridors and the creation of new view corridors will aid in the orientation and help to maintain strong visual connections between Victoria Park and the surrounding areas. Of particular importance are the views from Victoria Park to Richmond Street, as they help to connect a pedestrian corridor to Victoria Park. Other important view corridors are on the corner of Richmond Street and Dufferin Avenue, on the corner of Wolf Street and Wellington Street, and finally, the eastern elevation of the St. Peter's Basilica Cathedral, including the East Aisle and the Lady Chapel. And any application for an official plan or zoning bylaw amendment and site plan control should consider the potential for adding new ways to enhance existing view corridors where applicable. Then if we look at the connections, of course, connections to Victoria Park help to improve access to the park and enhance its relationship between the park and the surrounding areas. New connections to Victoria Park from Kent Street and Princess Avenue should be considered if development occurs. These connections will prioritize pedestrians, but may incorporate shared street or flex street options. Connections could be creative and innovative, such as covered walkways through buildings, and a high quality, well-lit and safe pedestrian connection, including benches, wide sidewalks, and transit amenities are encouraged if development occurs on land that could facilitate these connections. Moving further to the public realm, improvements to the streetscape and public realm around Victoria Park will help to strengthen the connection between Victoria Park and its surroundings, enhance pedestrian amenity, and expand the green landscaping of the park into the surrounding area. Landscaping and green space on public and private land will be maintained and where possible enhanced. The preservation of existing street trees and the planting of new canopy trees are encouraged. The green edge between the St. Peter's Basilica and the Dufferin Avenue should be maintained. And the City Hall block will continue to include a publicly accessible open space with civic focus providing a link between City Hall and Victoria Park. And new mid and high-rise multi-unit residential developments shall provide in and or outdoor communal amenity space for residents in order to alleviate some of the pressures onto Victoria Park. The cultural heritage resources surrounding Victoria Park are foundational to its character, and in addition to the cultural heritage policies as set out in this secondary plan, the objectives and policies of the Downtown Heritage Plan and the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District Plan will continue to apply. On-site and adjacent cultural heritage will be conserved. New development must be compatible with the heritage character of the surrounding heritage conservation districts. Policies and design guidelines from the two heritage conservation district plans will be used to review new developments and evaluate proposals to ensure compatibility with the surrounding context. And a heritage impact assessment will be required for new developments within the Victoria Park secondary plan boundaries. That brings me roughly to the middle of my presentation. I will see if there are any questions so far. If you do have them, please use the Q&A option for questions and the chat for general comments.
Perfect. And I do just want to add that we have another great coworker here, Laurel Davy Snyder, who will be facilitating and moderating the questions. And it does look like we have some.
Yeah, I will answer some of these questions. Perhaps Britt can help me as well. Will this plan incorporate the approval that Council recently made for the development of 556 Wellington, the old London Life parking lot? No, this presentation won't be talking about any specific sites. This is an overview of the process so far and the secondary plan as presented to Council in February. So no, we won't be talking about specific developments.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify on that one, the question is, will this plan incorporate the approval that Council recently made for the development at 566 Wellington Street? So I believe that the question is asking about the site plan that was approved and the existing zoning on the site. So the secondary plan is a higher level policy document. While that development does still have the zoning rights and site plan approval and development agreement, this secondary plan process does open it up for the longer term vision of the area. And if that development did not happen, then they would, and they came in for another proposal, then these new rules of the secondary plan could apply or could impact their development. And Laurel, are you there to ask the questions?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So the first, would you like me to continue with the questions we've received?
Yes. So I think the first one we have answered.
Yes. So the second one was about the massing diagram. So why does the massing diagram of the zoning heights show 566 Wellington property as 30 stories when in the presentation, the reality, the height is capped at 18 stories?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Generally, the permitted heights are 30 stories, but because there are additional setback requirements, in reality, only 18 stories can be achieved when provided with these setbacks requirements. Perhaps Britt has an additional answer to that, but
no, that's correct. So height is one thing that the zoning does provide a cap for in some situations, but that height is not always achievable with the other requirements of the zoning, which might be the amount of ground floor area or square footage. It could require setbacks and step backs. So it is a maximum height, but the other requirements might not always reach that maximum.
I have 3 more questions. The first is, as the development of 566 Wellington has been approved, will all future applications have traffic studies that reflect this development, even though it has not started yet?
So I can answer that one. So traffic impact assessments and studies are typically requested at the site plan stage when there's a more specific development that is proposed. My thought would be that at the site plan stage, any development in this area would ask for a traffic impact assessment or a study to make sure that however many new units and new drivers are introduced to the area is accommodated on the local roads.
I have 2 more questions and 1 comment, but I'll ask the questions first. The next question is, since the health of Victoria Park is a major concern of many Londoners, will a wind study be mandatory for all developments above a certain height, for example, that of City Hall?
yes, I can answer that one. So indeed, in our tools section, 3.10 of the secondary plan sets out that for all new mid and high-rise developments, a wind study is indeed required.
And the final question I received so far is, are development applications within this area frozen, in parentheses, until the secondary plan is finalized? If not, can this be done as it was in Old South?
So I can answer that one. We have not frozen development applications in this area. The tool to do that is called an interim control bylaw. And it's a very rarely used tool that can freeze development until such time as a study or a rezoning of an area is completed. We have not provided that here. One thing that I will note is that 556 Wellington does have existing zoning permissions that would not be impacted necessarily by the secondary plan. If they chose to change those zoning permissions in the future, then the secondary plan may apply to that. Similarly, there is any applications that do come in before the secondary plan is approved by council and any appeal period has been completed. Those developments are still they still are relevant to the kind of laws of the day or the regulations of the day, which would be the current ones. the current zoning bylaw and the London plan in areas where it's approved, and then 1989 official plan. So until the secondary plan is approved, any development would come in under the old rules. So
And there is a comment I received, but I believe there's a question in it. So I'm going to make it be a question. I'm going to rephrase it slightly. So in view of the fact that 556 Wellington has been approved, 566 Wellington, I believe, has been approved. It's noted that the question is, are all the principles that have been discussed so far, are they still applicable, or will they be applied? Is this a moot point, really?
As Britt just said, as long as the Victoria Park secondary plan has not been adopted by council, the existing zoning bylaws and existing zoning applies. This doesn't mean that the principles as set out in the secondary plan are moot, but these are a later plan, and currently no secondary plan exists.
Yes, so just to add on to that, any applications or approvals that have been approved are able to move forward. However, if property owners that have current approvals or current zoning do wish to change those approvals or zoning after the secondary plan is adopted, the secondary plan would apply to those properties. So hypothetically, if a property owner in this area wanted to apply for a rezoning after the secondary plan is approved, the secondary plan policies would still apply. So as we know, development can change very quickly, even within the same property over time. So they would still be applicable in any future decisions on other zoning.
One question did just pop up, and if there's time, Isaac and Britt, I'd like to ask that, if that's all right. Just to clarify, the development of 556 Wellington will not be over 18 stories high, question mark. I believe we're referring to 566 Wellington.
So I believe most of the questions have been on the recent site plan application for the property just north of Centennial Hall. And I believe the most recent proposal for that property is at the 18-story mark. And so I believe that is correct. We can confirm and clarify when we post this on Get Involved. But I think with that, feel free to keep asking questions, everyone, and we'll have another time at the after the presentation to continue answering them.
All right, thank you, Britt and Laurel, and thank you for asking those questions. I will move now to the next slide. There we go. Build form. Build form policies will help shape future development in a way that balances intensification and compatibility with the surrounding area and provides a transition between downtown and residential neighborhoods. All new development is expected to be of a high standard of urban and architectural design to do justice to the iconic civic space that Victoria Park is and to the jewel of the park system. General build form policies regulate setbacks and reinforce the established build form edge. It also includes a requirement that all mid and high-rise buildings will express a defined base, middle, and top. The articulation of building facades to reflect the existing scale and rhythm, and the use of high-quality materials is required for the facade. Policies to ensure active and attractive frontages for all sides of the park. And these policies will, for example, regulate the location of entrances and the size of residential lobbies. Further, policies regulate location, access, and visibility of parking. In the entire Victoria Park secondary plan boundaries, surface parking is prohibited and underground parking is encouraged where possible. And additional specific build form policies apply to the mid-rise and high-rise build forms to encourage a right fit and transition of higher intensity developments to the low-rise residential neighborhoods. First, I will show you mid-rise infill, which is 4 to 8 stories. The parking and service entrances shall be located away from the park and Richmond Street, unless there are the only frontages, then the impact on the pedestrian realm will be minimized. Buildings shall step back at least 5 meters from the street walls fronting Victoria Park, Wolf Street, and Richmond Street, and at least 3 meters when fronting other public streets and walkways. Parking shall be underground where possible, and if above ground, shall be structured and wrapped on exterior lot lines with other uses. And finally, street walls shall have a height of 4 stories, except along Richmond Street and Central Avenue, where street walls shall be 2 to 3 stories. Then the specific policies that apply for high-rise infill, which is defined as 9 or more stories. Towers should be separated a minimum of 25 meters. Tower floor plates will be limited to 750 square meters for residential towers and 1,000 square meters for office towers to minimize the shadow impact on the surroundings. Parking and service entrances shall not front directly onto Victoria Park or Richmond Street. Parking shall be underground where possible, and if above ground, shall be structured and wrapped on exterior lot lines with other uses. Podiums shall have a height of 4 stories, except along Richmond Street and Central Avenue, where podiums shall be 2 to 3 stories. And towers shall step back at least 5 meters from the base building fronting Victoria Park, Wolf Street, and Richmond Street, and at least 3 meters when fronting other public streets and walkways. The build form policies also set out the permitted heights. Building heights will generally transition from higher buildings in the downtown and fronting Richmond Street to lower buildings near low-rise residential areas. The greatest heights in the secondary plan are contemplated in the South Policy area, based on its location closer to the center of downtown. Heights in the Western Policy area are generally intended to be taller than heights on the Eastern Policy area, based on the proximity of the Western Policy area to the planned future rapid transit corridor and the requirement in the East Policy area to provide transition in height to the low-rise buildings in the Woodfield neighborhood. And finally, heights contemplated in the North Policy area consider that a portion of this policy area fronts onto a rapid transit corridor, and as such contemplates opportunities for tall buildings fronting Richmond Street and in the interior of the block, transitioning to the lower scale buildings in the Woodfield neighborhood and Victoria Park. If you take a look at the range of permitted heights, you see that in the North and East Policy areas, the maximum height is further regulated by Policy 3.65c, which is the angular plane requirement, which I will show you in the next slide. And on the other hand, the West Policy area includes a further requirement for the maximum heights based on Policy 3.65e, which is the shadowing impact on the band shell. So these requirements further regulate the permitted height, and if these requirements are fulfilled, the maximum as outlined in the different policy areas can be achieved. Here you see an overview of the angular plane requirements. These apply to areas that are directly against the neighborhood place type. The use of a 45-degree angular plane provides an effective method to transition new mid-rise and high-rise development to existing low-rise development, helping to mitigate the impacts of the new development, including, but not limited to, access to light, shadow, overlook sky views and the visual impact of massing. First, 10.5 meters is used as the right height of a single detached dwellings. A minimum of 6 meters setback is required in the rear yard. When a property is adjacent to a lane, the angular plane can be taken from the edge of the lane. And finally, a 45-degree angular plane from the rear property line will be taken from a height of 10.5 meters. And as you can see, this shapes and both the permitted heights in the mid-rise and high-rise buildings. Here is a demonstration plan that provides a representation of the possible build-out that could result from the implementation of the policies in this draft secondary plan. This demonstration plan is one possible scenario. Actual build-out will likely differ, as the policies could allow for a variety of different building scenarios. Generally, as I said before, there is a transition in permitted heights, with the greater heights achieved close to downtown, and a transition to the lower residential neighborhoods, as well as a transition from Richmond Street to the lower surrounding areas. If we zoom in to the different policy areas, here is the North Policy Area. The allowed range allows for up to 16 stories, but this is if the angular plane requirements are achieved. The frontage on Richmond Street allows for an opportunity for incentivification, as it is near the rapid transit corridor and the envisaged transit station on the intersection of Central Avenue and Richmond Street. And further, a full range of permitted heights up to 16 stories can be realized for the interior of the block if certain properties are consolidated into single ownership. Here you see the range of permitted heights in the East Policy Area, generally with a transition from downtown to lower heights around the residential neighborhoods that is part of the West Woodfield Heritage Conservation District. The most northern part of the East Policy District will remain low-rise. Parts B and C allow for an opportunity for taller buildings up to 8 stories, which is limited by the angular plane requirements. And then parts D and E of the East Policy Area provide an opportunity for high-rise buildings with the maximum heights limited by the angular plane requirements, as I said earlier, up to 30 stories. The South Policy Area allows for the highest range of uses up to 35 stories, as contemplated in the secondary plan, because this is completely in the downtown place type. So these are the highest permitted heights that can be achieved in the secondary plan. And then finally, the West Policy Area. For the most southern parts of the West Policy Area, heights are limited to the areas to the south and east of the St. Peter's Basilica to retain the prominence of the cathedral. North of the cathedral, heights will transition downwards, moving away from the downtown core. Part B allows for up to 30 stories. Part C allows for up to 25 stories, and these are regulated by the shadowing criteria. This is that new development will limit the shadowing on the concrete pad of the bench shell between the 1st of June and the 31st of August at any time between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. to a maximum of 25% of the total bench shell. And Part D allows for a full range of heights as permitted in the rapid transit corridor, so up to 16 stories. But this is only if the building is able to meet the shadowing criteria. That brings me to the land use policies. Land use around Victoria Park should be supportive of active pedestrian realm around the park, while recognizing the prominence of Richmond Street as a main street. A broad range of uses will be allowed in the secondary plan area, including residential, retail, service, office, community facility, and other related uses. For buildings fronting Richmond Street, a minimum of 60% of the frontage at grade will be street-related retail and service uses oriented to Richmond Street. And in addition, community, facility, and institutional uses may be permitted as well if they are used for street-oriented active uses. In the whole study area, outer-oriented uses such as drive-through facilities are prohibited. And finally, residential lobbies shall take up no more than 30% of the ground floor facade to a maximum of 15 meters. Of course, Victoria Parks serves as a citywide resource for active and passive recreational activities, and it is critically important to ensure the continued vitality and functionality of the Victoria Park as a destination for all Londoners. Noise studies shall be submitted with all site plan control applications, which consider how noise from festivals will be mitigated through sound dampening building practices. Purchasers and/or tenants should be advised of the possibility of noise from festivals through a warning class. And wind studies will be submitted with all zoning bylaw or site plan control applications for new, mid, and high-rise developments. The wind study will demonstrate how the wind conditions for proposed buildings are being mitigated and demonstrating the resulting conditions after mitigations are comfortable for both pedestrians on sidewalks and for users of the park. This brings me almost to the end of the presentation. What are the next steps? There are opportunities for more virtual engagement. Staff will consider the input received when preparing revisions to the draft secondary plan. We welcome all your comments and please provide your comments on the draft plan by December 15, 2020. And the final draft will be presented at the Planning and Environment Committee and Council in the first quarter of 2021. We will table the draft 1 month in advance to ensure that everybody has sufficient time to review prior to the public participation meeting. I want to thank you all for your participation, especially to planning staff and Councillor Kayabaga. I really appreciate everybody attending, and please feel free to ask any questions. Thank you. Laurel, perhaps you want to read out some of the questions.
Thank you, Isaac. I do have a number of questions, and based on last time, I think some more might pop up. So bear with me here. The first one is a little longer. The diagram of the tower built form. So maybe Isaac, if you could go back to the slide that illustrates the potential built form around the park. And maybe we can get some clarification on that. Yes, I think that's the one. So the diagram of the tower built form shows a continuous block of built form the entire block long, joining 2 towers into 1 podium. This does not seem in keeping with the historic atmosphere of the park, but rather a vista you would see on Dundas Street in the downtown core. Does the downtown design strategy supersede any historic flavor of the architecture around the park for those properties on the southern edges of the park? And I can repeat that question if you need to. It's long.
Yes, so I'll jump in here and talk about maybe the 2 areas that I think might this person might be referencing, either the east area, which does have the 2 towers shown kind of in the location of Centennial Hall and along that area. And there is in the policies direction on providing pedestrian connections and views towards the park. So that would be informing any development that might happen there. Another one that might they might be referencing is in the current Canada Life building parking lot, the closer area to the downtown, where there is another 2 towers there. And these, I would just want to, in all of these policy areas, I do just want to reiterate that this is a potential full build out of what the site could be implementing the policies. And there is other layers of regulation and of policy on this. And that would include any heritage approvals that would be required. In fact, we do explicitly state that heritage impact assessments would be required where appropriate in this plan at the zoning or the site plan stage. And so it doesn't necessarily preclude any of those other heritage guidelines or regulations or other regulations that would be applicable on any of the given properties. So hopefully that helps to clarify that answer a little bit, but if you wanted to provide a bit of context in the chat, we can try and clarify that a little bit more.
So the questioner did respond and say they were referencing a slide that showed 2 towers on 1 podium base. So Britt, I think you did address that. So the next question, would it be a lot of work, and I guess that's, is it possible to update the demonstration plan to show the actual approved proposal at 556 Wellington?
That's a very good question. This presentation is part of the public participation meeting back in February 2020. Of course, the proposal for the 556 Wellington application came in this fall, so afterwards. We have chosen not to specifically model this at this moment because the build form might change, but we will make sure to update our demonstration plan where appropriate.
Yep, and just to clarify as well, that this is a secondary plan and it is a long-term vision, and individual development applications could potentially change. So what we're trying to do with the secondary plan, which becomes part of the London plan, is think of the very high-level policy framework that we want to achieve. I won't comment specifically on the one development, but there is policy, and zoning is something that is constantly evolving and changing, and a development that might have fit with the old rules we might not necessarily want to carry that forward in a grandfathered way in our policy if we're looking forward to ideally what we would like to see in this area. So at the secondary, while there might be approvals in place for some developments, at the secondary plan stage, we are looking for the ultimate vision long-term of the area of what we would like to see if and when things change. But we do, I guess, just to answer the question a little more specifically on the demonstration plan, we can post images. We have modeled out the proposed building, and we can post those on the Get Involved webpage if that helps people visualize what it looks like.
So I am still receiving questions through the Q&A format, which tells me that it's working really well. Isaac, I believe you have the meeting booked till 8. Will we be able to continue to ask these questions?
Yes, of course.
Okay, great. So I'll continue with the next question then. The West Policy Area slide shows no development next to the Basilica. Previously, we saw a proposal that includes lower development just west of the Basilica. Has this now been removed? And will there be no building where the original manse used to be?
The demonstration plan indeed doesn't include development to the south and east of the St. Peter's Basilica. However, certain buildings are permitted between 2 to 4 stories, but we have additional policies in place that protect the existing view corridors, especially to the east side of the Basilica, and also maintain the green edges between Dufferin Avenue and the cathedral, which will potentially limit development.
Next question. The build-out models all have City Hall and London Life looking the same, but technically, are they not allowed to grow under this plan too? And then there's a second part to this question as well. So the question is, I guess, City Hall and London Life, the way they are, could they change under this plan?
So I can answer that one. In this demonstration plan, we have looked at specifically individually designated buildings, as well as those that we determined to be of like fairly obvious heritage character and value. And that's what the demonstration plan is showing. So I believe City Hall is individually designated, and there are some other heritage buildings that we do not anticipate would change or develop. Having said that, I do believe that the Canada Life building has had some additions on kind of the central part of it over time, and definitely the renovations and things to adapt these buildings is possible. And there could be sympathetic ways to build onto these buildings or around them that might be permitted, and all of those would have to go through a heritage impact assessment and an approval process related to the heritage of those buildings.
And the next part to this question, in general, are we losing or gaining public parking next to this beautiful space that all Londoners enjoy visiting? So that's referring to public parking, not private parking.
It is hard to answer that question specifically, but I would say that in general, in the London plan, there are policies to discourage surface parking lots in the downtown area. So there is a potential for the loss of some public parking, but the exact amount is for me hard to identify right now.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, so the parking lots that are in the area, I think for the most part are privately owned parking lots. So those could be used as kind of metered spaces that the public is able to use, but they could also be dedicated to monthly parking passes for employees or residents, for example. So it's hard to see, or it's hard to tell how much of the space is actually available and accessible to the public versus to private employees or residents. But in the plan overall, each of the individual developments that might come in the future would that would be reviewed as part of it, would be the parking spaces provided.
Okay, this next question is about wind studies, which we've talked about a bit. This is specifically asking, do wind studies take into account the combined impact of the current application with other existing development and also with other approved development not yet built? So essentially, what do wind studies take into account?
I'm not a wind technician, but in general, wind studies take the current application into account. So I don't think that they will look at other improvements, at other development, especially if it's not yet approved or built.
Mm-hmm. My understanding is that wind studies generally will take a specific development into account and the existing context, and they may make recommendations on how that development can be shaped in different ways, such as removing shear walls or providing articulation or step backs to reduce the wind impacts. But it would only be required for the existing context, as we can't predict, or a developer can't predict every possible outcome of other development sites that they're not in control of. But we do require the wind study at site plan that would be able to address a specific development proposal.
Okay, this next question is about climate change and impact. You have a principle, number 11, regarding limiting impact on climate change, but you want a minimum of 70% glazing. Won't that amount of glazing required negatively impact climate change because of the significant HVAC required?
First of all, I should clarify that the minimum of 70% glazing should be achieved through all of the frontage. I haven't looked specifically into what the HVAC impact will be, but this will be looked at every individual site plan application.
And it is a good comment, and we will take that back, and we'll ensure to continue our conversations with our sustainability staff in the city. So that is a good comment, and we'll take that under consideration as we're moving forward with that sustainability section and any changes that might come up.
Next question. Sorry, my screen is jumping around with new questions here. The demonstration plan records a maximum of 8 stories on the east area north of Wolf Street, yet you mentioned that it will be a maximum of 18 stories.
I'm not exactly sure when I refer to the 18 stories, perhaps that is the existing zoning, but based on, the 18 stories comes from the current development application.
Correct, yes.
This is because the secondary plan has not yet been adopted, and therefore the current application has priority over the secondary plan after it's been adopted.
So the next question is similar. From what I understand, at 566 Wellington, the full 30 stories is not achievable due to other requirements, which we've discussed, and only 18 stories is possible. Would there be similar impacts to any of the other proposed towers on the demonstration plan slide where the full zoned height is not achievable? Is it possible to get an updated slide showing only the realizable height based on other requirements?
Okay, so I'm happy to take this one, and it is worth an explanation of the role of a secondary plan and the role of the zoning that's currently in place. So this secondary plan is a step up. It's the official plan policy, and it's supposed to be more broad. In this particular secondary plan, we are focusing a lot on the built form as it relates to the park. So the secondary plan provides the policy context, and then once a secondary plan or an official plan is adopted, then staff has the direction to update any zoning bylaws that impact that area. So the policy and the zoning, or the policy we're proposing with heights in this secondary plan, doesn't necessarily match the existing zoning in the area. So that's where you're seeing these specific heights that are permitted in the secondary plan or proposed in the secondary plan on this slide that's up. Those don't match what is permitted with the existing zoning. So a property owner is allowed to build within their existing zoning framework. So one potential thing that we could do is, after a secondary plan is approved, we would update the zoning in the area to reflect that. We haven't gotten to that point, obviously, yet, that we would be looking at the zoning. So it is grandfathered zoning that has been carried over from multiple years. And that is why the zoning on the property is very different. Isaac, if you can flip to the zoning heights map, that does give an indication of what could be built with the existing zoning to date on the property, maybe the 3-dimensional model. So this is a representation of the existing zoning in the area right now. So You see in some areas that would be zoned likely downtown, it could go up to 30 stories. The one site at 566 or 556 Wellington, you can see it is 30 stories, but you can also see it's very narrow. And that's where we run into the situation where it's not feasible to build a building up to that 30 stories because of the setback requirement. So there is a difference between the secondary plan and the policy we're creating that will inform future zoning, but we are stuck with the existing zoning as it is, and that is the rights of property owners.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next question. And unfortunately, the person that asked this question had to leave, but is looking forward to seeing the answer in the on the Get Involved site. Are there policies which would ensure that mid and or high-rise residential structures provide balconies or other external areas for residents? COVID has brought to light that some balconies have not been designed in a manner that provides adequate and usable space.
That's a great question, especially with the recent developments of the COVID-19 pandemic. Currently, we have no policies in place that specifically talk about balconies. We do have policies that talk about communal indoor and outdoor areas for residents. But this is a really good point, and we will look further into this. So this is great. Thank you.
Next question. Would heritage impact assessment studies / reports for proposed developments within the study area be done and paid for by the applicants and or their consultants? So the question is, who would pay for these heritage impact assessment studies or reports for proposed developments?
Yeah, so a heritage impact assessment is typically a requirement of a complete application for either a site plan or a zoning amendment. So it would be along with other studies and the fees associated with submitting those applications, it would be paid for by the developer or the property owner. It is reviewed by internal staff that are trained in heritage. We have a number of heritage planners in-house at the City of London that do review these reports, and where they see something that doesn't really measure up, if you will, because I'm kind of reading between the lines on this question. They do review them and provide comments back, and there is a back and forth that, and essentially the heritage planner will make a recommendation whether or not the proposal has been justified.
Okay, next question. What about Centennial House? Its lease is up in a couple of years. It might be potentially a redevelopment. Might it be a potential redevelopment?
Sure, and I can share some information on that. So we are showing here the potential redevelopment of that property. That's not to say that is in the plans at all. But we are marking it, that property is located within the downtown place type in the London plan. So it does have development potential from a policy perspective. I am not aware of any plans at this point for the redevelopment of that property though. Nothing has been submitted.
Okay, next question. And this is about how decisions are made essentially at council. So how can we guarantee that these principles and regulations in the secondary plan are adhered to by City Council? This is really important because council ignored staff and community heritage in this plan by approving development in the East Study area at 556 Wellington.
So, sorry, I'm just reading this again. So ultimately, City Council is the decision makers, the elected officials that are elected to make decisions on behalf of the citizens of London. So the way that processes work is that staff in various expertise, heritage, urban design, environment, make recommendations to City Council through the appropriate committee. And ultimately, it is City Council's decision and their prerogative to vote on matters and make decisions in the way that they see fit that represents their constituents.
I've got 2 more questions so far. So the next question is, where do the City Hall precinct guidelines fall in the hierarchy of planning directives?
So that's a good question. I believe you're speaking to the City Hall precinct as it's mentioned in the Heritage Conservation District. So another kind of nuance of the policy, the secondary plan policy does guide the land use and form and intensity of the area, but there is the Ontario Heritage Act and the Heritage Conservation Districts that have their own sets of rules and regulations. And those are evaluated on a development by development basis. And that's how decisions are made. And so it does, the HCD, the Heritage Conservation District, is a part of that evaluation for individual developments. And the secondary plan is another kind of layer to that analysis for any development.
And the last question I have on my screen right now is, oh, another one just came in. If so second last question, if the secondary plan has prescriptive built form permissions and site setback or angular plane requirements, is it possible the difference is due to these other limitations?
So I'm not, maybe a little bit of clarification on that question, if the person that asked it can clarify. Are you speaking to the difference in what the heights that could be actually achieved versus the heights that are the maximum permitted? Well,
maybe I'll move on to the next one and hopefully we can get some clarification in a minute, if that's okay.
Yep.
So last question, oh no, second last question again. Isaac mentioned earlier that all green space would be maintained and enhanced both on public and on private property. The East Policy Area slide shows less green space than there is currently. How can this principle be upheld?
So we'll have to look at the specific language in the policy. I do believe it speaks to maintaining the green boulevards, which are largely on public property. We do have very wide rights of way. So the actual road that is in public ownership goes up to the very front of most of the buildings surrounding Victoria Park. So it is in public ownership, and the policy intent is to maintain that kind of grassy appearance and feel of the area surrounding, so that the park green space bleeds out into the surrounding streetscapes. But we will review the specific policies that relate to that, and we can provide that in the on the Get Involved website as an update.
And there was a follow-up comment to that question, just saying that specifically referring to the green space and upholding that principle around and on the City Hall property. So that was just a caveat to that. Another question just came in. Are there angular height guidelines from the park as well as from the Heritage neighborhood that would protect open sky vistas of the park? If not, why not?
So I can answer that question. The angular height guidelines only apply to lot frontages directly against the neighborhood place type. So there are no angular height guidelines directly from the park. It is a good question why angular planes are not provided from Victoria Park. In general, this is because if you stand in Victoria Park, the development that exists is not always that visible. For example, because there are a number of existing trees. But we will take another look at this and take this comment with you.
And we did receive clarification on that other question. So the the clarity was the height shown in different slides may not properly reflect the prescriptive proposed secondary guidelines. It may serve or help to revise the concepts accordingly.
Yes, so when we did the demonstration plan modeling, it was factoring in all of those form policies, including setbacks and step backs and tower floor plate maximums and separations. So there is a lot of guidance or policy on what the form could actually look like beyond the heights of buildings. So in this demonstration plan, all of that is factored in. Having said that, this is not necessarily what any particular developer might propose. The buildings could be located on shifted in different areas of sites, or they could be shorter or in a different configuration than is shown here. This is just what we anticipate would be a full build out option. So these demonstration plans do include all of the urban design policies that are in the plan. If you look at the heights map and the heights that are permitted in the table, Isaac, I'm not sure if you can go back to that.
You mean the heights for the secondary plan or the existing heights? Sorry, my computer is a little slow right now.
Sorry, for the secondary plan.
It should come up any second now, but my apologies.
No problem. So the heights table does, it's not up yet, but I will explain. So the heights table does reference, in many of the cases, the maximum heights regulated by 3.6.5C. And so that's a policy that talks about an angular plane. So the demonstration plan does show with the angular plane incorporated, but these heights, in some cases, it might say up to 30 stories, and also as regulated by the angular plane. In the demonstration plan, it does show the angular plane incorporated. So in some cases, you might not be able to achieve that full amount. And in some cases, maximum height has been put on a given parcel because the angular plane actually would allow for buildings that are taller than that. So if you're going on a 45-degree angle from a neighborhood, in some of the situations, you can get up very high, up to 35 or 40 stories with that angular plane incorporated. So we put another kind of cap on the height so that we didn't only have the development that could go up that high. Hopefully that clarifies a little bit.
So I haven't received any other questions in the past couple of minutes.
Okay.
I'm not sure if anyone else has any.
Yep. So maybe we'll just kind of stay here for one more minute if anyone wants to sneak in one last question, understanding we are over time already. And you can certainly reach out to Isaac directly. There's his contact information. And also on the Get Involved website, you have opportunity to provide some feedback on there as well.
And in addition to what Britt said about the getinvolved.london.ca website, I want to thank everybody again for their participation tonight. We will take all comments and Q&A questions with us, and these will also be posted on the getinvolved.london.ca website. And also, please feel free to reach out to me, preferably by email, for people who are not on the screen, but perhaps are on the phone line, ideceust@london.ca. Thank you.
Perfect. And we'll just hang around for one more minute till we'll say 8:20. And if anybody has any last minute questions, get them in there now. Otherwise, reach out to us. And I'd like to thank also Isaac and Laurel for doing a great job moderating and answering questions and the presentation. And thank you everyone for attending.
I think that there is one additional question. How specifically does this proposal address climate change. I'm not exactly sure what this proposal means, but in general, the sustainable development policies apply to all properties and areas in the secondary plan. We are further refining these climate change policies. So if you want to provide some clarification on which proposal this exactly applies to, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay.
There is another question. It's a little similar, but a little different. How are sustainability principles included on the secondary plan?
So all development applications within the Victoria Park secondary plan area are encouraged to include sustainable development and build form. Another policy encourages the provision of electric charging for electric cars, as well as providing amenities for active transportation uses, such as bike storage. So these are strongly encouraged.
And we have been working internally on potential revisions to the building sustainable development section, and to increase that, as that was one of the items that we heard when we did present to Planning Committee back in February. So we welcome any other comments related to those policies as well. And I see we have another question about, we know the wording such as encouraged doesn't have a lot of weight. How do we make this language stronger? So we'd welcome any particular comments on specific policies. We are keeping in line with the language in the London plan. So the idea of a shall is a must-have, a should is a must-have, but alternatives may be considered. Encouraged is a lot more flexible. So if you have specific comments on policies in the plan, we would definitely welcome any comments on the language and areas to strengthen or to relax the language as well.
Yeah, and in addition to some of the policies that I just mentioned, another one is all new mid-rise and high-rise developments shall include green roofs or cool roofs to help reduce the impact of buildings on the climate. So this wording, shall, is a little bit more prescriptive, like Britt just outlined.
Okay. So looks like the questions have stopped. So we are going to end this meeting. Thank you everyone for your great participation.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.